All right. So, good morning. Good morning, everybody. I am Sylvia Pudu. I am the CoM SSA coordinator at the Agence Française de Développement. So the AFD is, since 2019, one of the implementing partners of CoM SSA, focusing on unlocking climate finance through the support to urban energy and climate infrastructure projects in urban and peri-urban areas in sub-Saharan Africa. So welcome to this session on gender and public lighting. Gender is a very important issue at IFD. We have a very ambitious target to achieve in 2022. 50% of projects must integrate gender objectives as main or secondary one, and 700 million euro of project integrating gender equality as main objective. Also, AFD strategy gives the priority to African continent and supports the promotion of gender equality and the protection and emancipation of women and young girls. So this is why we decided to develop a study as we wanted to address the unequal situation of gender and vulnerable people in public urban street lighting projects in sub-Saharan Africa. So the goal of the study was to analyze to what extent public street lighting projects could reduce the feeling of insecurity by better taking into account the needs of women and men in planning of urban public space. We wanted also to understand the impact that a gender-sensitive public lighting may have on the use of public space and on the economic activity. So the results of the studies wanted to obtain operational recommendation and develop tools and methodology for the identification, preparation, and implementation of urban street lighting projects. So this is why we are here today to present you the results of this study and the information that we have collected and analyzed. We want also to validate the results and receive your feedback, especially from those who are willing or would like to develop street lighting project in their municipality. We would like to take the opportunity to present you a user guide for mainstreaming gender in public street lighting projects that hopefully will be useful for the municipality, but also for other stakeholders that are involved in this issue. So today I am glad to have a 100% female panel of speakers. So today we have here the representative of Econolair, who is the consulting company that has been hired to develop this study, who has been working this last 10 months on this study. So we have here today Amandine Gall, who is the head of team at Econolair. She is an energy efficiency expert with more than 15 years working in energy efficiency, project design, project management, energy studies. She is a graduate in energy efficiency and renewable energy in buildings from La Rochelle University, and she holds a degree in thermal engineering and mechanical engineering. So the second speaker is Alina Meyer. She is an independent consultant with over 19 years of experience in the area of human rights, gender, diversity, and social inclusion. She is a former Canadian diplomat and development practitioner. So prior to consulting, she worked for Global Affairs Canada, the formerly Canadian International Development Agency, as Senior Policy Advisor on Women's Rights and Gender Equality Specialist. She holds a master degree in human rights and the social anthropology from the University of Oxford. Last but not least, Khadijatou Ahmed. She is the technical assistant of the R&D project at the region of Nouakchott. The R&D project you will see later is the Sustainable Development Project that has a a street lighting component in Nouakchott. She is Khadijetou, sorry. She's graduated from La Rochelle University as a civil engineer, and she holds a master's degree in new construction and rehabilitation technique. Before joining the Nouakchott region in September, she worked as operation manager in a firm specialized in ecological construction. So apart from the speaker, I wanted also to mention the other consultant from the other expert from Econolair who participated in the study. Giulia D'Angiolini, project coordinator and energy efficiency expert, Joël Matt, gender equality and energy expert, and Maiton, senior street lighting expert. Finally, I would like to also thank other contributors. First of all, the region of Nouakchott and the Kampala City Capital Authorities, and also the IFD team, both at headquarters and also in the field, in the agency. Today, after my brief introduction, I will leave the floor to Alina to present the study, the context, and the diagnostic from Nouakchott and Kampala projects. Then we will have an intervention by Khadijetou from the region of Nouakchott, and then Amandine Gall will take over to present the results and recommendation, and also she will present the user guide. So we will take some time to have an interactive panel discussion. Please feel free to ask your question on the chat, and we will summarize then, and then we will try to answer to your question. And in case we are not able to answer to all the question, we will make sure to send you all the answer by writing through the Secretariat. So it remains just me to wish you a very fruitful discussion, and I will leave the floor to Alina. Please, Alina.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for that introduction. Well, we're trying to really fit all this into an hour. And as you can see from the themes in front of you, we could probably spend a whole morning or day discussing some of these concepts in gender equality. So I just wanted to put them out there. I won't go into a detailed explanation, but we're trying to be quick so we can have Q&A time at the end. And feel free, if these kind of resonate, to jot them down and we can discuss them further in the Q&A. But I wanted to sort of raise these issues because they do impinge upon the two projects we're going to discuss. I mean, some of these won't be new to you, of course, in terms of the wealth gap, but as we know, women are more adversely affected in terms of economic situations, and they do represent the poorest of the poor. So there's a gender aspect to the wealth gap issue. There's far more women who work in the informal sector. As we know, that's less regulated, more dangerous, but also impinges upon, how women move within the city and how they benefit economically within the city. Intersectionality is that idea of understanding a woman's diverse identities and needs and making sure we look at the woman holistically, not as a monolithic entity. So that's a fancy name for a very simple concept, thinking of a woman, not just in terms of her gender, but her disability status, her migrant status, her economic status, etc. So that's just one concept I wanted to flag because we're really trying to look at well-being more holistically when we dive into the street lighting and gender discussion. So those are a few topics I wanted us to keep in mind. In terms of the problem we're aiming to address, I mean, Sylvia's outlined the main objectives, well, and the purpose of this study. But we know that cities in sub-Saharan Africa generally as a whole tend to be, not as well lit and weak in terms of an understanding of that, bringing the gender equality and social inclusion angle into discussions of urban development and street lighting. So we're really trying to apply that gender equality, social inclusion, and also the energy efficiency lens. There's many reasons why it remains a challenge. Cities, as everywhere in the world, in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, are constantly expanding and growing. There's lots of informal settlements. Often, as we know, there's these cities and their development and growth are underfinanced. At the municipal level, there's often a lack of resources, often very little diversity among municipal employees. Sometimes women don't have a seat at the table. and are not informing those discussions. Sometimes they are, but often they lack the really decision-making power, or at least being part of those decision-making bodies. Often street lighting systems tend to target the major roads, and as we know, men and women move through the city differently. So when you're targeting the major thoroughfares, often you're ignoring a key aspect of women's lives and how they move through the city, which is in a much more staccato way, and it's in a much more complex way, as often they're doing chores, picking up children, perhaps having a second economic activity informally in the evening. So the street light systems targeting major thoroughfares also sometimes impinge upon that. And then, sorry, if someone can just mute themselves, perhaps it's Christine, I'm just hearing a bit of background noise. Perhaps Christine, you could mute yourself. Thank you. Also, from a technical capacity perspective, there are challenges. In every city, there's challenges when it comes to maintenance and upkeep. And we looked at that angle when it comes to street lighting and the provision of adequate street lighting and technology. Again, the energy efficiency technology angle is also part of the problem and part of the challenge. So in terms of how we were attempting to address that challenge, I mean, really the objective of this study was to sort of look in depth at 2 urban public street lighting projects. We know there are many, but we wanted to kind of hone in on 2 and use those as a base to inform, future street lighting projects and the Committee of Mayors of sub-Saharan Africa. So those are 2 cities that we chose that fit within that rubric. One is Nouakchott and one was Kampala. So we're a bilingual team when we were doing those in English and in French. And in order to really kind of create some very concrete, practical, specific recommendations, which Amandine will present later, on how we can work as a community, as a development community, to better integrate gender, energy efficiency, social inclusion concerns into the street lighting projects that we deliver. So in terms of research methods, we took a strongly qualitative approach, exploratory walks, which again, if you have questions about the methodology, either Amandine or I can answer and discuss them further in the Q&A, but exploratory walks were groups of individuals walking through the city, usually after dark, and giving feedback on their experiences. And we would stop at different places in the city, focus group discussions, of course, from a sort of diverse array of audiences to get a sense of the realities for women and men on the ground in the city, and then some key informant interviews with key officials, both in the municipalities and other activists and key stakeholders. So that was our approach, which was strongly qualitative, as a way to kind of get a sense of some of those challenges I just outlined in the prior slide. So in terms of the 2 projects, I'll just do a very quick whistle-stop tour of them. But again, if you have more questions, we can definitely go into more depth in the Q&A, and they're also in the project documentation and the tools that we'll be sharing. So we looked at 2 cities, as I mentioned, Kampala. So we looked at the Kampala City Lighting and Infrastructure Improvement Project, which is currently ongoing. It started in 2019, and there's still several years left. So it's nice that we got that analysis in relatively early on in the project's development. It's financed by AFD. And there's already some work that had begun before we did our field work, which was primarily in February of this year. And there already had been a master plan and feasibility study for street lighting in Kampala City that had been finalized in March. And so that also informed our research and our qualitative data gathering. In Nouakchott, which you're going to hear about soon, and luckily we have someone, a representative from the region. It was support to the Nouakchott region for resilient and equitable sustainable development, and we'll have a representative speak to that. That started in 2020 and goes till 2023, financed by the EU. So there's a strong street lighting component to that project in terms of looking at in quite a detailed manner at the installation of solar street lights. Especially in sort of peripheral areas. As I mentioned, often the street lights focus on the main thoroughfares, and looking at how we can broaden that scope to more peripheral areas where often women live and work. Thank you. So again, very, very quick whistle-stop tour of the recommendations, and we can discuss further at the end. But in terms of the recommendations for Kampala, these are some of them. We had city specific, but then also general recommendations that outlined our takeaways for both cities that we think can apply to to others. So, I mean, designing a clear maintenance plan for installed streetlights was one recommendation that came out of our field work in Kampala. When there's not a really good system to report when a streetlight is broken or failing or has been stolen, for example. So thinking in a more intentional way about maintenance plans and outlining that and how to rectify that was one kind of very concrete recommendation that we came up with based on some of the challenges in Kampala, which I'm sure in other cities as well can be a challenge. So introducing a central tracking system for streetlights, again, trying to have more control and measurement in terms of the streetlights that are installed and making sure that they are well maintained and still effective. Citizen participation. We really found that citizens are very engaged and interested in this concept, but they're not always brought in. The municipality and others don't always think to engage them. And really, if they're brought in from upstream in the project development, that can have a huge positive impact, not only on efficacy, but on inclusion and gender equality concerns writ large. So making sure we get active citizen participation early on, because often once you have that citizen buy-in, it continues. So that's a really useful factor to have. Inclusive streetlight design. I mean, I've already touched upon that, but thinking again upstream about how to integrate vulnerable people into project design. Not always easy and sometimes more expensive, but again, if it's done upstream, it's a lot easier to ensure that those vulnerable and traditionally excluded groups are included. Another proposal we came up with in the context of Kampala was subsidizing tariff rates for street lighting connections on the network. So especially when specific sectors where women go to trade and engage in business, I was talking a lot about the informal sector, but both in terms of the formal and informal sector, having a lens to women's economic opportunity in businesses. And that's how that recommendation came about. Also encouraging long-term engagement in land tenure and demarcation. We know that a lot of Kampala is owned by private landholders, and really trying to get their buy-in, their understanding, their cooperation from the outset in this is really important in the context of Kampala. And this might be replicable in other sub-Saharan African cities as well. So taking into account that private landowning aspect and land tenureship and thinking about demarcation methods. So really trying to get that buy-in and ownership from the landowners, especially when it comes to informal settlements, but it's the case throughout the city. And again, as I mentioned, another lens we were applying was energy efficiency. So trying to integrate that as well. And again, we can talk more about that in the Q&A, but again, having that energy efficiency and the gender lens would really benefit the project. And I'll move on quickly to the Nouakchott recommendations, and then I will leave it for my colleague from Nouakchott to go into further detail on this and to do her presentation. So some of the specific city relevant recommendations coming out of our study was for urban areas with the highest potential to improve the sense of security and lead to greater engagement in urban life. Make sure we focus on those areas and see where the value add can be to women. But again, it's not just for women, for all of, all urban dwellers and public transport users. Also promoting the employment of women in the private sector and in the street lighting sector. So institutional framework for gender inclusion and diversity policies could be very useful. Having some kind of framework that organizations can follow, whether it's the municipality, the private sector, etc. Making sure we have an efficient system in terms of technology, training, maintenance, trying to work towards efficiency on that front. And again, that's from a inclusion, but also from an energy efficiency perspective. Just like with Kampala, citizen consultations and involvement are really, really key. Again, much more ideal if they happen upstream, really trying to talk to citizens and the users of the public spaces, of the transport networks early on to make sure that they are consulted, they're involved, and that the street lighting project responds to those needs that they themselves have articulated. That's a really, really key one. And then ensuring social approaches to the street lights. So the idea of awareness, collective responsibility, as in Kampala, trying to get buy-in from the community, seeing street lights as part of their public good, something that they own as well, not just as just the municipality's business, is really key as well. So kind of a change in awareness, and some of that is sensitization and socialization of that approach. And then financial approaches, in the case of Nouakchott, was another tack in terms of looking at sources of funding, making sure the annual budget takes these on taxes, etc. Making sure there's budget lines for this, and that those budget lines also include considerations of energy efficiency and gender equality and social inclusion writ large. So without further ado, I will introduce our next speaker, who is actually from Nouakchott, and she's going to give her intervention. So Khadijatou, I leave it to you, and thank you so much for participating. Merci, et à vous, Khadijatou. Merci.
Thank you, Elena. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. So I will be presenting briefly the experience and the feedback of the Nouakchott region on the diagnostic reports. First of all, it will be useful to remind that the Arrondre project has planned to endorse some street lighting in to endorse some outlay districts, some urban areas with street lighting, solar street lighting. But this activity has not started yet. It will start with a diagnostic workshop that we will plan with the West African cities network and our partners. The choice of the district that we will and the urban zones areas that we will make will be based on the distant and populated districts that have expressed their interest and their needs in requests that have been addressed to the Nouakchott region. We receive a lot of requests from people that express their need of street lighting, and those will be the priority. Then these requests will be processed based on different specific criteria, such as the density, the frequency of crime in the area, the distance to the downtown, and the existence of economic activities. I will remind that these criteria were adopted in the previous phase and will be adopted in this activity that we will have in the Arrondre project in accordance with the report's results. We will also have the consultation with the local stakeholders to facilitate the identification of the target areas and the places that should be lit, the streets, places, and others. Indeed, in the same approach adopted of the installation of the street lighting in the previous phase, Arrondre, we tried to involve we try to involve a municipal community that include the stakeholders and also the beneficiaries. I will remind you all that regarding to the gender equality question in this project, we have a project led mainly by women. The coordinator is a woman, the technical assistant, the administrative assistant, and some of the animators are also women. So we can say that the Nouakchott region have we don't see any segregation based on against women in these terms. Regarding to the maintenance, the Arrondre project plans to set up a technical maintenance unit for the public lighting, for the street lighting. The unit will be endowed with human, technical, and financial resources in order to fulfill the missions. The implementation of an intelligent maintenance management system is also expected and planned to facilitate the monitoring and the intervention of the maintenance team. It is also planned to involve the beneficiaries in the monitoring and supervisions of lampposts through a committee that we will call local lamppost monitoring committee, which takes cares of the transmission of breakdowns to the team so that they can to the unit so that they can make their interventions. In terms of the design of the lampposts, it is planned to base it on the evaluation results of the Aranda projects, but also to involve the gender dimension order and to have feedback of the beneficiaries on the design, if it's suitable or not. Now I will do a brief feedback on the reports that we think we've read it and enjoyed, and we think that it's the reports results are in line with their reality on the ground concerning the relationship between lighting and the aspects related to security, economic, and sociocultural. Nevertheless, we can add that the cultural aspect of the society is used to not having at all lights. So due to the Bedouin culture. So for this purpose, many Nouakchotois are resentful of the street lighting, even if they are aware of the usefulness of it. It's some of our weird culture. We should say clearly also that the absence of the street lighting has affected the university program, because today all the classes in the university stop at 6 p.m. every day. And that's because it is in an area where there is no lighting, and it is really an urban area. In terms of policy favoring gender, the Nouakchott region can be an exception, as I mentioned earlier, because we have a woman president and we have 3 vice president women. The woman is also very omnipresent in the staff, and generally speaking, there is no intentional policy of segregation in Mauritania. It's just, I think, a lack of knowledge of maybe the women were not very well educated. So there are some jobs that they can't do because they have not learned to do. But it's not that there is nothing that prevent them from doing those jobs. And we are seeing the development today that women can do a lot of things that were not doable in years. I remember when I started doing civil engineering, it was because there was no many women that did it. But now I see that a lot of my fellow Mauritanians have done a lot of other engineerings, entering in the aeronautic, hydrologic, and every other domain. So it's really nice to see. The region of Nouakchott will take into consideration the specific recommendation in terms of potential privileged areas to improve the feeling of security, and the approach proposed to strengthen the integration of the gender dimension. In regards of the Aranda projects, before the implementation of the activity, specification defining the eligibility criteria of areas and conditions of projection of street lighting will be drawn up in accordance with the recommendation of the reports. And also the monitoring and the evaluation plan will be used to achieve the logical framework of the activity in order to ensure that our approach complies and is in line up with the recommendations. I think that will be all. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Khadijatou. It was very, very interesting to see to reflect in a real project all the results from our studies that I will present now. Thank you so much. So based on these 2 diagnostics that we have done in Kampala and Nouakchott, that was very, very on the ground, and also some state-of-the-art analysis, we defined 5 pillars for key results. So one thing that is very important to understand is like a kind of definition of gender equality outcome that come from this as a result of our study. It's like street lighting system and services are responsive to women, girls, men, boys' needs and priority, and accessible, affordable, safe, and sustainable. This is like a huge summary or small summary of all the aspects that need to be considered within the street lighting to be efficient and gender responsive. So one thing that was mentioned by Arina and Khadija too is the security and well-being. It's one pillar that is very important, and it's, as we said, applicable for women, men, boys, girls, like every citizen. Economic empowerment is to also, it's a part of the street lighting that can help to improve improve to provide a safe and productive environment. Voice and rights, it's a pillar that will with aim to empower women and make sure that they're part of the decision-making process, they're part of the management within the project. As Khadija too mentioned, it's already the case in Nouakchott, but it might not be the case always in all the stakeholders. Gender capacity building is this part is to make sure that the people and the service providers and the technical persons that will design, will operate, will implement the street lighting project, operate it and maintain it, have the necessary knowledge and capacity to do it properly. Concerning the sustainability, it's more related to energy efficiency, and it's to make sure that the street lighting are energy efficient. And also one part would be is that they use renewable energy if it's relevant to power the street lighting. So these are the 5 pillars, and these pillars integrated the steps of an energy efficiency street lighting project. Just to remind you, I'm sure the majority of you know all the steps, but quickly. So first of all, you organize and prepare your project, you involve the relevant stakeholders, you set up a team, and you define some financial requirements. Then you plan and design, you really plan and design your street lighting system, in this case to be inclusive and energy from a gender perspective, and energy efficient. And you do some public consultation to make sure that you integrate the needs and requirement from the citizens. Then you define your procurement procedure and your tender procedure to tender the project. Then you install it, you build it, and you test installation to make sure that it complies with the requirement and the design you've done in the earlier phase. And at the same time, you operate and maintain and monitor and evaluate. So while you operate and maintain, you monitor and evaluate the monitoring and evaluation indicator you set up at the beginning during the planning phase. So based with the 5 pillars and the general step, we define some recommendation which are generic. Before you saw specific recommendation for Nouakchott and Kampala, and we'd also define some more generic recommendation step by step, indicating the pillar that they correspond to. So I will quickly go through some of this recommendation. There is much more that are presented in our guide. So at the project organization and preparation stage, one thing it would be to make sure you involved all key stakeholders in street lighting, meaning not only electric utilities or some ministries, but to make sure you involve all the key stakeholders, and you raise their awareness about gender equality and social inclusion, and also energy efficiency aspects. So they will have in mind during the whole process of the project this aspect to make sure that the project is sustainable. So then when you set up a team and you train the team, you train your team member about energy efficiency, gender, international norms, gender responsive street lighting, and so on. At planning and design, you make sure you include public consultation, which are exclusive and gender balance consultation. So for instance, one example would be to make focus group with only women to make sure that the women voiced are included within the projects. And at procurement procedure, you make sure that you indicate a measurement and verification procedure, which will help you to define the energy saving that you expect from your street lighting, energy efficient street lighting in comparison with like standard street lighting. And this measurement and verification should include gender equality, social inclusion, and energy efficiency aspects. And at operation and maintenance, you ensure that women and women have fair and equal access to capacity building program, so they have the capacity and the knowledge to operate and maintain the street lighting system based on best practices. And just to make sure, concerning monitoring and evaluation, I mentioned it before, it is something very important that is usually required by donors. And it's a best practice to include a monitoring and evaluation plan and follow your project. So first of all, first thing that you should do is you develop a monitoring and evaluation plan when you design your street lighting project and any kind of project. And at this moment, you define indicators and you define the baseline data for your indicators. So when the project starts, you have your baseline and you know how, like for instance, for example, the street is illuminated or not. Then you installed your system, your street lighting in this case, and after, when it's the installation is finalized, you monitor again and you evaluate again your indicators. So you can have some insight on your project impact. You compare them against your baseline and you repeat this monitoring. The monitoring is ongoing, of course, and you repeat this evaluation periodically depending on the indicators. So now I don't know if Sylvia want to jump in, but all these results and all the findings and generic tools on recommendation, on gender inclusion definition of how it is a street lighting project, which is gender responsive, gender inclusive, and energy efficient, are included in a user guide that we developed. And here is the link to go there. It will be, of course, shared between the participants afterwards. And it's really generic. It has the two examples of Kampala and Nouakchott. And you can, and also I think it will be available in the Q&A chat. Here you have like a tool, a generic tool to make sure that you include, that you define and you build and you maintain and operate a gender sensitive public lighting. Sylvia?
Yes, Thank you, Amandine. I think this was a very nice and comprehensive presentation. As Amandina said, I mean, this was just a summary of what is in the guide. In the guide, you will find more information that hopefully will be useful and also easy to use. So yes, this guide can be also shared with your colleague, also the people that are not less familiar, no, of street lighting project and gender experts. So I think you have the link is also in the chat. You are more than welcome to share them with everybody. And I think we can go and pass on Q&A. I saw there are some questions in the chat. So I will read it to you. So let me check. Okay, the first question was from Christina, who wants to have more information on how to integrate the vulnerable groups in the planning. She mentioned it, for example, through NGOs. I think maybe Alina or yeah, I think Alina that has the.
Hi, yeah, I'm happy to take that, Sylvia, and then
yes.
If Amandine or Khadijetu or any other colleagues want to add in, I can start us off. Thanks, Christine, for the question, and no worries. I know I often forget to mute myself, so no problem. So in terms of how to integrate them, I mean, I touched upon some of this in the recommendations for Kampala and Nouakchott. But yes, I mean, as I mentioned, getting buy-in early on from those groups, but that means trying to include those groups and hearing about their needs directly from them. So when I talked about citizen participation and public consultations, that would include those groups of vulnerable people. And if those groups are not at those consultations, there should be an effort made to reach out to them separately. And sometimes that might require a little additional effort or money, but it's really important. So, I mean, I think if you can include them, ensure that they're included in the public consultations that you hold, that would be the best bet. But if they're not able to attend those, making a special effort to make sure you reach out to, you mentioned NGOs, exactly, the civil society representatives responsible for some of those vulnerable groups and voicing their needs. Often there are really wonderful advocates, activists, and representatives. So making sure that you reach out to them if they're not already included in those consultations. And again, making sure it happens upstream so that it's not kind of considered later as an add-on, then it becomes much more complicated. But if those constituencies are included from the outset, it becomes much easier to talk about, you know, how we look at inclusion more broadly. There was one other thing I was going to say. Oh, the qualitative methods that I outlined. I mean, those can be really useful for making sure you're reaching out to vulnerable groups and that you're getting meaningful feedback. So something like an individual interview, a key informant interview, that could be one way, but also focus group discussions with a key group of activists in that area is another. So looking at qualitative methods, I think, is a really good way to make sure you're incorporating vulnerable groups in and making sure you reach out to those group reps, to activists, but also sometimes to individuals. Is a good start to make sure they're included in the planning, but others might have more to add. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Alina. We have another question from Marina Reiskens-Lutz. She is very interested in hearing about whether there are any future cities that are earmarked to be involved in such project next, and have such a similar project being conducted elsewhere already. So what can I say? As part of our study, not for the moment, but we hope there will be other city that will be willing to have this kind of studies in their cities. If there are projects being conducted elsewhere already, such as this, I don't know if Amandine has an idea. No, I don't.
When we did the state of the art and the whole study, we saw that there is like part of like some aspects that were considered in some city. In the guide, you will see that there is some examples of based on one recommendation. There is some example at some faces, different faces, or from some one of the pillars that we discussed. But we haven't seen up to now like comprehensive approach that takes into account the gender aspects from the start until the end, and considering the gender aspect not only for security, but also for economic empowerment, voice and rights, sustainability, and all the pillars. So it is something that we would like to see, and maybe in future years we will be able to make a new workshop and present a wonderful project like our Kampala or Nouakchott that will be able to integrate all these aspects.
Thank you. There is another question from Bruno Lafitte. What are the indicators for assessing the success of this project? I think you will find all the indicators in the user guide. We also put some priority indicators so that you are not bound to use all of them, but at least the priority one would be helpful already to have a project that is gender sensitive. Amandine, if you want to add anything.
I was opening the publication because we define also within the publication we define different we try to make it easier, so we define different indicators based on the pillar. So we have indicators for security and well-being, indicators for economic empowerment, indicators for voice and rights, gender capacity building, and sustainability. Mainly concerning the sustainability, it's related to energy efficiency, and any kind of energy efficiency project in street lighting will have the same, but we add some indicators. For instance, I can name one for numbers of women and girls, men and boys who report increased usage of public space after dark. So it's something that you can measure through a survey or a face-to-face survey or a focus group, or even some other methodology, and then you compare it after when the project is finalized as an installation. This is one example. We have some priority indicators listed in the publication, and we have also in the publication some questionnaires and tools that will help you to gather this kind of information to make sure that you have a strong baseline, and then you can do it after the project, and so you can define if you reach your targets.
Thank you, Amandine. So we have another question, and then I saw that Mr. Edison Mashrek from the KCCA Kampala could join us. So I propose to answer our last question and maybe give the floor to him, because we thought we could not attend. So the last question was from Mr. Charles Mabika from Harare, Zimbabwe, who is found this presentation very enlightening, so thank you very much. And he asked, how do you involve all the women in the city? So maybe we can have some insight from the two diagnostic. I don't know if Alina.
I think Alina is.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that quickly, but then Sylvia, you read my mind. I was just going to say the same thing. Sorry, I forgot to turn my video on. I see that Edison is on there, and of course, Edison, we'd love to have you have you participate. We weren't sure, you know, with your situation that you could. So thank you for joining. And I'll try to be very brief because I'd much rather give you some time if you're up for it to contribute. In terms of how to involve all the women in the city, Charles, thank you for your question. I think it goes back to how you consider inclusion writ large. And it kind of goes back to that concept I mentioned at the beginning about intersectionality. As I said, it's a fancy word, but for something very basic, which is ensuring that we look at women's diverse needs. So, you know, for example, a woman is not just a woman. She might be a woman with a disability or a hearing impairment or a physical disability that impacts her ability to move through the city in different ways. Or a woman who is both a caregiver at home, but also has a job, an informal sector job in the evening, right? Understanding sort of the complexity of women's lived experiences and making sure we don't categorize woman as one monolithic thing who maybe has one pattern of movement throughout the city. We know that women have very different patterns of movement. As I said, they move very differently from men. But even within women, there's very different movements for those who work outside the home, those who only work in the home, those who perhaps take public transport for an economic opportunity elsewhere, those who go to school or other learning educational opportunities. So just making sure we're cognizant of that. And as I said, I really think public consultation, citizen engagement, talking to the actual beneficiaries of the project, right? We know that that's not just best practice, but it makes sense. And is the right thing to do. So making sure we talk to those beneficiaries at the beginning, because so often those decisions are taken at the highest levels and don't involve women's lived experiences of moving through a city. So just trying to ensure we really talk to the beneficiaries themselves. Again, methodology for that, public consultation processes, focus group discussions, individual interviews, talking to activists and NGO reps is a very good start. But I'll end there, and maybe as Sylvia recommended, we could give Edison a few minutes if you're comfortable, Edison, since we do have you here, which is wonderful. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I've had to join you quite late. I was just trying to attend to some issue with one of my staff. Who also tested positive for COVID. So somehow I delayed to join you in the meeting. But I thought probably I could just catch a few of the last minutes of the meeting, and maybe if there are specific questions, then I could be able to answer the questions as I don't want to repeat maybe something that has already been said or has been discussed. Yeah, so I thought I could just join in for a few minutes and try to answer some of the questions that may be there.
I think there is one question for you from Karin Sono, Sylvia.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, she's asking, was the person plan for the different precise maybe, huh? Is that for the different neighborhoods in Kampala?
Precinct, the precinct plan. Yeah, precinct. It's about neighborhoods within neighborhoods. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the different neighborhoods in Kampala developed under CoM SSA by the KCCA used for the land tenure aspects.
I wouldn't say they've been used for. I don't know what he meant by land tenure. I know that we have a very complex land tenure system in Kampala. The stage where we are with the precincts plans is quite still at a higher level. So it's not yet gone down to like plot level, defining and what should happen at plot level. That's where we expect that most of the issues regarding the land tenure system will arise. But what we think that will happen at that level is to bring all the concerned stakeholders on table, both the landlords, both present and absentee landlords, maybe first level tenants, second level tenants, and the different parties that are involved in the land question and land issue in those precincts, and include them in the discussion to actually define what should happen and how the different developments should be handled. That's what we think will happen when we go to the next stage of the precinct plans, which is now the more detailed stage. But also what we did was that the precinct plans, the precincts that were selected for the pilot were those which we thought would have relatively fewer issues regarding land. So the bulk of the land in those precincts is either for institutions. Part of the precincts is the kind of the upper scale Kampala, where land rights are fairly well defined and land ownership is fairly well defined, and so it is easy to engage with the landowners and landlords to know to get their views. So that was also one consideration that we took to select those precincts to start with. We didn't want to start with precincts which were extremely complicated in terms of land tenure, as this was the first time we were getting to such levels of detail in terms of physical planning. We didn't want to test with very complex areas, so we started with the ones which are relatively fairly more organized, but also where land rights are relatively more defined. So part of the areas we do have a few areas within those precincts which are more informal in nature, but those parts are not large within those precincts, and so we thought that would give us a very good balance to deal with the precincts where land rights are well defined, and also a bit of where the land rights are more complex. So that's what I can briefly say about if that was regarding how we were integrating or planning to navigate the urban planning issues with the land tenure system that we have in Kampala.
Thank you very much, Edison. I think it was a really nice closing of this webinar. We are approaching to the end, so it was really nice to have you and the witness from Kampala as well. Maybe we can show the last, I mean, you have all our email address. In case there are further questions, you can either send an email to us if you are interested to know more. You will have more information, of course, in the guide. But should you have any question, please feel free to send an email or also to the CoM SSA Secretariat. We will be happy to answer to you. So I would like to thank you very much for this really interesting discussion. I'm happy that this subject was, I mean, quite interesting for you, or maybe new as well. So we look forward to more integration of gender in street lighting projects. And thank you very much for all the speakers and the representative of Nouakchott and Kampala. And thank you for the Secretariat for letting us, giving us the space for this webinar. So I would like to thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edison.
Bye.
Thank you, Khadija, too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alina. Bye.